study of Kabbalah, particularly the Lurianic system developed by Rabbi Isaac Luria in the 16th century, the concept of Tzimtzum occupies a central role in understanding the dynamics of creation, the relationship between the infinite and the finite, and theodicy within the mystical framework. And while at first glance it may appear as a metaphysical hypothesis or philosophical abstraction, a careful scholarly examination reveals it to be a highly structured and precise conceptual tool that addresses fundamental questions regarding how the Ein Sof, the infinite divine, can bring forth a finite, contingent reality without compromising the absolute unity and omnipresence of God. For the question arises, if the divine is infinite and all-encompassing, how can any form, object, or creature exist as distinct without being immediately overwhelmed or subsumed by the infinite light? And here at Tzimtzum, the notion of contraction or withdrawal becomes pivotal, describing a process whereby the infinite light, or Ein Sof, metaphorically withdraws or contracts itself in order to create a space, a vacated conceptual locus in which finite beings and phenomena can manifest. And while classical sources, including the writings of the Ari and his disciples such as Rabbi Chaim Vital, often describe this withdrawal in dramatic, almost narrative terms, modern scholarship recognizes that Tzimtzum is best understood not as a literal spatial contraction but as an intricate metaphysical maneuver, whereby the intensity of divine revelation is concealed, modulated, or refracted so that contingent beings can emerge, maintaining their distinct identity while still receiving sustenance and being from the infinite. Thus, Tzimtzum provides a solution to the apparent paradox of creation, how the finite can exist without violating or being obliterated by the infinite, and how God can be simultaneously transcendent and immanent, present in all things without limiting the autonomy of creation. Within this framework that the Lurianic Kabbalah introduces a multi-layered process in which the act of contraction initiates a cascading sequence of events, including the emanation of the 10 Sephirot as structured vessels or channels for divine light, the shattering of certain vessels, Shevaret Hakalim, due to their inability to contain the intensity of the light, and the subsequent process of tikkun, rectification, which allows for the restoration and harmonization of the cosmos, each stage demonstrating the interplay of concealment and revelation, restriction and outpouring, withdrawal and emanation. Furthermore, it is important to recognize that in Lurianic thought, Tzimtzum is not merely a physical or spatial event but a conceptual and existential condition, framing creation as a dynamic tension between presence and absence, fullness and emptiness, and allowing for the emergence of free will, ethical responsibility, and relationality within creation. For if the infinite light remained fully revealed without contraction, no independent being could exist, no autonomy could be recognized, and the narrative of the human and cosmic journey would be impossible. Thus, scholars have interpreted Tzimtzum as providing the necessary ontological precondition for contingency, multiplicity, and relationality in the universe, enabling the existence of distinct entities while maintaining the continuity of divine causality. And in this sense, the act of contraction is not a diminution of God, but a self-imposed concealment, a deliberate modulation that enables the fullness of creation to emerge without overwhelming it, a notion echoed in the writings of both classical commentators and modern interpreters who seek to reconcile the infinite and finite in coherent metaphysical schema. Additionally, textual analysis of sources such as Shar HaKavanot and Etz Chaim reveals that the Ari's discussion of Tzimtzum is both precise and nuanced, emphasizing that the withdrawal is total only in its conceptual framing. God, in essence, remains fully present, yet, for the purposes of the emerging worlds, a qualitative concealment occurs, creating a space within which finite vessels can develop their own structures, energies, and degrees of revelation. This interplay between concealment and presence forms the backbone of Lurianic cosmology, underpinning the subsequent doctrines of Shevaret Hakalim, where vessels are unable to contain the intensity of the divine light and consequently scattering sparks of holiness, nitzatzit, throughout creation, thereby establishing the theological and mystical imperative for tikkun, the rectification, which is not merely a cosmic process but also a personal and ethical one, in which human beings, through action, contemplation, and spiritual practice, participate in restoring the balance, gathering the scattered sparks, and aligning the finite with the infinite in conscious harmony. And it is in this multidimensional understanding that Tzimtzum also addresses profound philosophical concerns, such as the problem of evil, for by positing a concealment of the light, the Ari and his followers provide a framework in which the existence of imperfection, limitation, and suffering can be understood not as a flaw in the divine, but as a necessary condition of finite creation, a byproduct of vessels attempting to contain infinite energy, thereby situating ethical responsibility and spiritual labor as central to the human role in the cosmos, and in this way, Tzimtzum functions as both a metaphysical principle and a guiding framework for moral and mystical engagement, situating human agency within the grand narrative of cosmic rectification, while simultaneously preserving the transcendence and immanence of God as the infinite remains fully present even within the space of concealment. And scholars note that this dual aspect of presence and absence is critical for understanding the unique structure of Lurianic thought, in which creation is neither fully independent nor fully identical with God, but exists in a mediated, relational state that allows for dynamic interaction, ethical development, and the continuous unfolding of divine purpose. Furthermore, analysis of historical context indicates that Luria's introduction of Tzimtzum was revolutionary, addressing concerns raised by prior Kabbalistic systems regarding how an infinite God could coexist with a finite, contingent world. Offering a sophisticated schema that integrated cosmology, metaphysics, and soteriology into a unified conceptual framework, emphasizing that the very process of concealment is itself an act of divine compassion, allowing creation to emerge, develop, and ultimately participate in the restoration of harmony, thereby situating the human role as both participant and co-rectifier within the divine economy. And it is this intricate balance of infinite presence and qualitative withdrawal that has captured the attention of both traditional scholars and modern academics seeking to explore the philosophical and theological implications of Lurianic Kabbalah, highlighting Tzimtzum as a central principle for understanding divine creativity, the emergence of contingency, and the interrelation of unity and multiplicity in mystical thought, while textual exegesis demonstrates that every nuance of terminology, from clavificated space to ormuk of supporting light, carries precise metaphysical significance, reflecting a complex layering of concealment and emanation, presence and absence, intensity and restraint, that underpins the entire Lurianic system and informs subsequent Kabbalistic practices, mystical interpretations, and ethical imperatives. And when understood in the scholarly framework, Tzimtzum emerges not as a mere metaphor but as a rigorous conceptual model, a cornerstone of Lurianic cosmology, and a lens through which one may examine the intricate interplay between the infinite and the finite, the eternal and the temporal, the concealed and the revealed, offering profound insight into the nature of divine causality, the structure of creation, and the ongoing role of humanity within the unfolding cosmic drama. Continuing the exploration of Tzimtzum, one observes that the Ari's conception of divine contraction is intricately linked to the dual modalities of orpenemy, inner light, and armakif, surrounding light, distinctions that provide critical insight into how the infinite can maintain its totality while simultaneously allowing finite existence, for orpenemy is the light that flows directly into the vessels, sustaining them and shaping their structure, whereas armakif is the encompassing, indirect light that surrounds but does not penetrate the vessels fully, creating a condition in which the finite can sense the divine without being overwhelmed. And this duality is essential for understanding both the metaphysics of emanation and the ethical mystical responsibilities entailed in the process of tikkun, the rectification, as the human participant is tasked with collecting and elevating the nitzatzit, the scattered sparks of holiness, which exist precisely because the vessels could not contain the intensity of the divine flow, a failure that is not accidental, but a necessary outcome of the interaction between the infinite and finite modalities, revealing a system in which the interplay of limitation and abundance, contraction and emanation, concealment and revelation is structured with logical and metaphysical precision, demonstrating a remarkable sophistication in Lurianic thought. Scholars note that this schema also resolves long-standing philosophical tensions regarding divine omnipotence and the existence of contingency, for by positing a qualitative contraction, Tzimtzum preserves the omnipresence and infinitude of God, while simultaneously creating a space for free action, ethical responsibility, and the emergence of multiplicity, such that beings exist as true entities with independent causal powers relative to the finite domain, yet remain ontologically dependent upon the infinite light, a subtle balance that allows for both divine transcendence and immanence without contradiction, and this balance has far-reaching implications for understanding Lurianic soteriology, cosmology, and anthropology, as it situates human action not merely within a moral framework but within the very architecture of creation itself. Textual analysis of Etz Chaim and Shar HaKavanah indicates that Tzimtzum is not a singular historical or temporal act but an ongoing metaphysical condition, a continual modulation of divine light that allows finite worlds to emerge, persist, and evolve, so that at every moment the infinite both withdraws and sustains, conceals and illuminates, and human perception is structured by these phases of presence and absence, reinforcing the ethical imperative that every act, intention, and spiritual practice contributes to the restoration of cosmic balance, a notion that has inspired extensive commentary both in classical Kabbalistic circles and among modern scholars of Jewish mysticism. Furthermore, philosophical reflections upon Tzimtzum highlight its capacity to address the problem of evil, for the very necessity of contraction implies that the intensity of divine energy cannot be fully actualized within finite vessels without overwhelming them, resulting in an inherent fragility of creative existence, and it is precisely within this fragility, the presence of limitation, the existence of concealment, that human ethical and spiritual agency emerges, allowing beings to participate in the elevation and rectification of the cosmos, transforming limitation into opportunity, constriction into purpose, and chaos into harmony, an understanding that integrates metaphysical, ethical, and mystical dimensions into a cohesive theoretical framework. The relationship between Tzimtzum and Shevet HaKalim further elucidates this structure, for the shattering of vessels illustrates the dynamic consequences of attempting to contain divine light, emphasizing the necessity of rectification, the role of human consciousness in collecting the Nitzatzit, and the recursive nature of divine-human interaction, revealing a cosmos in which contraction, emanation, and restoration form a continuous cycle, and where the qualitative concealment of God does not entail absence but establishes the conditions for free will, ethical development, and relationality, ensuring that the infinite remains fully present while the finite retains the capacity for authentic autonomy. Additionally, historical scholarship situates Luria's formulation of Tzimtzum in the broader context of Safe Kabbalah, noting that while earlier Kabbalistic texts such as the Zohar describe emanation and the flow of divine light, Luria uniquely articulates a conceptual mechanism for the coexistence of infinite and finite, addressing tensions in prior systems regarding divine omnipresence and the emergence of multiplicity, and providing a metaphysical model in which concealment is not merely negative but constitutes the creative condition for existence, multiplicity, and ethical responsibility, reflecting both profound philosophical insight and deeply structured mystical imagination. In this scholarly perspective, Tzimtzum is therefore both explanatory and prescriptive, offering an account of the ontology of creation while simultaneously framing human action as a critical component of cosmic rectification, demonstrating that the metaphysical act of contraction is inseparable from the ethical imperative of tikkun, a framework in which every human intention, meditation, and action contributes directly to the restoration of cosmic harmony, the elevation of scattered sparks, and the alignment of finite existence with the infinite, and it is precisely through this dual function, metaphysical structuring and ethical implication, that Tzimtzum retains its centrality in Lurianic Kabbalah, provide a robust, coherent model for understanding the dynamics of divine-human interaction, the structure of creation, the persistence of multiplicity, and the ongoing imperative for human engagement in spiritual and moral work. Moreover, contemporary scholarship explored the conceptual sophistication of Tzimtzum, noting its resonance with philosophical debates regarding the nature of infinity, the problem of causation, and the metaphysics of relationality, suggesting that Luria's insight into the necessity of divine action anticipates modern discussions of contingent reality, emergence, and the interplay of limitation and potency, and that Tzimtzum offers a paradigm for reconciling the absolute with the contingent, the infinite with the finite, and the transcendent with the immanent, in a manner that preserves both the unity of the divine and the authenticity of creation, making it a critical concept not only for mystical practitioners, but also for scholars of philosophy, theology, and the history of ideas. Finally, the ethical and practical ramifications of Tzimtzum extend into mystical practice, engagement, and personal spiritual cultivation, for the concealment of the light calls the practitioner to recognize the subtle presence of the divine in all circumstances, to act consciously in elevating sparks of holiness, to cultivate awareness of hidden realities, and to participate in the ongoing process of rectification, highlighting the inseparability of metaphysical insight and ethical action, and confirming that Tzimtzum, far from being a mere abstract principle, functions as a comprehensive lens through which the structure of reality, the nature of divine-human interaction, and the ethical responsibilities of finite beings may be rigorously understood and applied in both theoretical and practical domains. Continuing the scholarly examination of Tzimtzum, it becomes evident that the concept is intricately interwoven with the structural framework of the Sephirot, the 10 emanations through which divine energy flows and is configured into the intelligible and perceptible cosmos, for within Lurianic thought, the act of contraction is necessary to allow the Sephirot to function as discrete vessels capable of channeling, distributing, and regulating divine light, and without Tzimtzum, such differentiation would be ontologically impossible, as the unmitigated intensity of Ohr Ein Sof would immediately overwhelm any potential form, leaving no space for relational dynamics, multiplicity, or finite existence. Scholars highlight that this structuring is not merely cosmological but also epistemological. Tzimtzum establishes the conditions under which finite beings can perceive, interpret, and interact with the divine, creating a layered reality in which the light is simultaneously present and concealed, giving rise to gradations of revelation and concealing that structure both mystical experience and ethical responsibility, thus enabling human agency and conscious participation in the ongoing process of tikkun. Moreover, Lurianic texts articulate that the initial contraction creates a metaphysical, vacated space, kalal, within which the first vessels of creation are formed, yet the Ari emphasizes that this space is not empty, in an absolute sense, but rather constitutes a qualitative withdrawal wherein the divine light recedes to allow for ontological differentiation, a subtlety that underscores the sophistication of Lurianic metaphysics and challenges simplistic spatial or literal interpretations, and it is here that Tzimtzum's conceptual depth emerges most clearly, revealing that the infinite is never absent, only concealed, and that the interplay of presence and withdrawal is essential for the integrity of creation. Following Tzimtzum, the emanation of the 10 Sephirot proceeds in a structured sequence, yet the intensity of the Ohr Ein Sof proves too great for certain vessels, resulting in the shattering Shever Hakalim, which is both a metaphysical necessity and a dramatic illustration of the consequences of infinite light encountering finite capacity, and scholars note that this shattering is not random but a critical component of Luria's cosmogony, establishing the conditions for human and cosmic rectification, as the dispersed sparks, nitsatzit, require elevation, collection, and integration, thus situating ethical and spiritual activity at the center of the mystical and cosmic framework, and highlighting the direct link between Tzimtzum, human action, and the maintenance of ontological harmony. Further scholarly analysis emphasizes that Tzimtzum, in combination with surrounding light, or makif, provides a nuanced understanding of divine immanence, for while the vessels receive the inner light, or penami, and are subject to shattering, the surrounding light continuously enfolds them, maintaining divine connection without direct penetration, a distinction that safeguards both the transcendence of God and the integrity of the finite world, allowing for mystical perception, ethical discernment, and spiritual cultivation within a coherent metaphysical structure. In addition, textual exegesis reveals that Tzimtzum functions as a conceptual solution to classical theological problems, including the question of evil, suffering, and imperfection in the world, for the partial concealment of divine light explains the presence of limitation, deficiency, and fragility without compromising divine omnipotence, and situates the emergence of ethical agency and spiritual endeavor within a meaningful cosmological and theological framework, reinforcing the notion that human participation in tikkun is both necessary and efficacious. Historical scholarship further situates the formulation of Tzimtzum within the intellectual and cultural context of 16th century Safed, noting that Luria synthesized prior Kabbalistic insights from the Zohar, the writings of Moses Cordovero, and earlier mystical traditions to articulate a coherent model in which the infinite could coexist with a contingent, multiplicity-rich cosmos, thereby offering a sophisticated metaphysical and ethical framework that addresses both ontological and practical concerns and influencing subsequent generations of Kabbalists, Hasidic thinkers, and modern scholars of Jewish mysticism. Additionally, contemporary philosophical analysis interprets Tzimtzum as a paradigmatic insight into the dynamics of limitation, potentiality, and emergence, highlighting parallels with modern metaphysical discussions of contingency, emergence, relationality, and the interplay of infinite potential with finite instantiation, suggesting that Luria's schema anticipates modern considerations of how the infinite can manifest as the finite without annihilating it, and how finite beings can exercise autonomy while remaining ontologically dependent on a sustaining ground. Moreover, the ethical and mystical ramifications of Tzimtzum extend beyond the theoretical, informing ritual, contemplative, and communal practices. Practitioners seek to emulate the dynamics of concealment and revelation, to attune their consciousness to the surrounding and inner light, to elevate sparks of holiness, and to participate consciously in the ongoing rectification of the world, demonstrating that Lurianic Kabbalah is not merely speculative, but also prescriptive, intertwining metaphysics with praxis, and grounding human action within a cosmic framework that is both coherent and spiritually profound. Finally, scholarly reflection underscores that Tzimtzum, as a principle, establishes a delicate balance between divine transcendence and immanence, between infinite unity and finite multiplicity, between concealment and revelation, providing a foundational conceptual structure through which the dynamics of creation, the emergence of contingent beings, the possibility of ethical agency, and the ongoing work of cosmic and personal rectification can be rigorously understood and coherently integrated, and this integration cements Tzimtzum's status as a central and indispensable concept in Lurianic Kabbalah, offering profound insight into both the metaphysical structure of the universe and the ethical mystical responsibilities of human beings within it. Continuing the scholarly analysis, Tzimtzum must also be understood in its dynamic relationship with the subsequent processes of emanation and rectification, as the initial contraction establishes the conditions for a layered, multi-tiered cosmos in which divine light interacts with discrete vessels in varying intensities, producing a spectrum of ontological realities and degrees of revelation. And in this structure, each stage of emanation, from Keter through Malchet, functions within the conceptual framework created by Tzimtzum, whereby the finite vessels exist in a carefully calibrated field of divine presence and concealment, ensuring that creation is neither overwhelmed by the infinite nor isolated from it. Scholars emphasize that this configuration is critical to understanding the metaphysical coherence of Lurianic Kabbalah. It permits the coexistence of multiplicity and unity, contingency and necessity, presence and absence, all within a logically rigorous system that integrates cosmology, ontology, and ethical praxis. And the system forms the foundation for the later elaboration of Shever Hakalim, where the vessel's inability to contain the unmitigated intensity of Ohr Ein Sof results in a shattering that produces a dispersion of sparks, nitzatzit, which demand rectification and ethical and metaphysical tasks that human beings are called to participate in through awareness, intentionality, and action. Furthermore, the distinction between Ohr Penimi and Ohr Makif is again salient here, as the surrounding light, or Makif, continuously enfolds the vessels, even when they are unable to receive the inner light fully, demonstrating a continuous divine engagement that preserves the immanence of God while maintaining the necessary concealment that allows finite existence, a concept that underscores the subtlety and depth of Lurianic thought and its capacity to reconcile seemingly paradoxical aspects of divine causality. From a philosophical standpoint, Tzimtzum functions as a conceptual solution to classical dilemmas regarding omnipotence, omnipresence, and the existence of evil and limitation, since the qualitative withdrawal of divine light explains why finite beings experience deficiency, fragility, and imperfection without implying any diminution of the infinite, and it establishes the ontological precondition for ethical responsibility and spiritual labor, situating the human role in the elevation of sparks, the correction of vessels, and the alignment of the finite with the infinite, thus integrating metaphysical theory with praxis. Historically, Luria's articulation of Tzimtzum represents a significant development in the evolution of Kabbalistic thought, synthesizing prior teachings from the Zohar and the Kordovirian system, yet offering a novel conceptual mechanism for explaining how the infinite interacts with the contingent, allowing for both the emergence of multiplicity and the maintenance of divine unity. It is this innovative aspect that has drawn scholarly attention, both for its internal coherence and for its influence on later mystical and philosophical traditions, including Hasidic thought, modern Jewish philosophy, and contemporary interpretations of mystical metaphysics. Moreover, Tzimtzum provides a framework for understanding the recursive and fractal nature of reality, as each contraction allows for nested levels of emanation, concealment, and revelation, generating a structured complexity in which infinite potential is continually expressed in finite forms, and each finite form participates in a dynamic interplay with the surrounding light, allowing for relationality, ethical discernment, and mystical perception. Textual analysis further highlights the significance of language and terminology in articulating Tzimtzum, as terms such as kalal, vacated space, or makif, surrounding light, or penami, inner light, each carry precise conceptual weight, indicating a system in which spatial and energetic metaphors function as explanatory tools rather than literal descriptions, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of metaphysical abstraction and the limits of human comprehension in describing infinite realities. Additionally, the ethical and mystical dimensions of Tzimtzum are inseparable from its metaphysical formulation, as the very concealment of the infinite generates conditions under which human beings can exercise free will, engage in rectification, and elevate the sparks of holiness scattered by the shattering of vessels, emphasizing the interdependence of knowledge, perception, and action in the Lurianic schema, and demonstrating that Tzimtzum is simultaneously a principle of ontology, epistemology, and ethics. Contemporary scholarship has also examined Tzimtzum in relation to modern philosophical debates, drawing parallels between the Lurianic model and discussions of emergence, relationality, contingency, and the interaction of infinite potential with finite instantiation, highlighting the enduring relevance of Luria's insight into the problem of how the infinite can manifest without annihilating the finite, and how finite beings can possess authentic autonomy while remaining ontologically dependent upon a sustaining ground. Finally, the integration of Tzimtzum within mystical practice, ritual, and contemplative life emphasizes its functional significance, as practitioners seek to emulate the dynamics of concealment and revelation, attune their consciousness to inner and surrounding light, and participate in the ongoing process of rectification, demonstrating that Tzimtzum is not merely a speculative construct but a foundational principle guiding both metaphysical understanding and spiritual praxis, ensuring that finite beings remain ethically and spiritually accountable within the complex, dynamically structured cosmos, and confirming its status as a central concept for rigorous scholarly analysis, philosophical reflection, and mystical engagement within Lurianic Kabbalah. Continuing the scholarly examination of Tzimtzum, one must also consider its profound implications for understanding the emergence of divine multiplicity and the configuration of the Sephirotic system, for the act of contraction establishes foundational precondition for differentiation within the divine light, allowing the Sephirot to manifest as distinct vessels capable of receiving, channeling, and reflecting divine energy in graded intensities, and this differentiation is critical to the integrity of Lurianic cosmology, as it resolves the apparent paradox of how the infinite can remain unified while simultaneously giving rise to a multiplicity of finite, contingent realities. Scholars emphasize that Tzimtzum is not a temporal event in the ordinary sense, nor a spatial withdrawal, but a conceptual framework describing a qualitative modification in the mode of divine presence, wherein the intensity of Ohr Ein Sof is veiled sufficiently to create a functional vacated space, kalal, in which the potential for distinct vessels exists. And this nuanced understanding distinguishes Lurianic thought from earlier Kabbalistic models, which often struggled to reconcile divine omnipresence with the emergence of independent forms. Tzimtzum is intimately connected with the processes of Shever Hakalim and Tikkun, as the initial contraction leads to the creation of vessels that, due to their finite capacity, shatter under the intensity of divine light, scattering sparks, nitzatzat, across the vacated space, thereby generating a metaphysical necessity for rectification, which is both a cosmic and human endeavor, and this sequence underscores the inseparability of metaphysical structure, ethical responsibility, and spiritual practice in the Lurianic framework. highlighting the role of human consciousness in the ongoing process of restoring balance and harmonizing the finite with the infinite. Additionally, the distinction between our penemy and our makif is central to understanding the continuous interplay of divine presence and concealment, as our penemy flows directly into the vessels, sustaining and shaping them, while our makif surrounds them without direct penetration, preserving the immanence of God while maintaining the necessary concealment that allows finite existence to emerge. And scholars have noted that this dual modality provides an elegant solution to the problem of how the infinite can be present in the world without overwhelming it, enabling relationality perception and ethical discernment. From a philosophical perspective, Tzimtzum addresses the classical problem of evil and the presence of limitation, for by positing a deliberate concealment of divine light, Luria explains why finite beings experience deficiency, imperfection, and fragility while preserving the omnipotence and unity of God. And this conceptual framework situates the emergence of ethical agency, spiritual endeavor, and human responsibility as central to the ontological order, demonstrating that limitation and concealment are not failures, but essential conditions for authentic freedom, multiplicity, and relationality. Moreover, historical analysis situates Luria's articulation of Tzimtzum within the intellectual milieu of 16th century Safed, reflecting a synthesis of earlier Kabbalistic traditions, including the Zohar and Kordovirian thought, yet providing a novel metaphysical mechanism for explaining how the infinite interacts with the contingent world, allowing for the emergence of independent forms while maintaining absolute unity. This innovation has been recognized as one of the defining features of Lurianic Kabbalah, influencing both subsequent mystical systems and modern scholarly interpretations of Jewish mysticism. Additionally, the recursive and fractal character of Tzimtzum is noteworthy, as each contraction permits nested layers of emanation, concealment, and revelation, generating a cosmos in which infinite potential is expressed through finite forms and multiple degrees, allowing for dynamic interaction, ethical engagement, spiritual perception, and demonstrating the sophisticated metaphysical insight underpinning Luria's system, as well as its practical implications for human spiritual development. Textual exegesis further illuminates the precision of Luria's terminology, as terms such as kalal, vacated space, or makif, surrounding light, and penemy, inner light, are employed with deliberate conceptual rigor, reflecting a highly structured metaphysical model in which spatial metaphors serve as explanatory devices rather than literal descriptions, emphasizing the subtleties of infinite concealment dynamics and the conditions for finite existence. The ethical and mystical dimensions of Tzimtzum are inseparable from its metaphysical formulation, as the very act of concealment establishes the conditions under which human beings can exercise free will, engage in rectification, and elevate sparks of holiness, situating moral and spiritual labor at the center of the cosmological framework and demonstrating that Lurianic Kabbalah integrates ontological, epistemological, and ethical considerations into a unified system. Contemporary scholarship has also explored Tzimtzum in relation to modern philosophical debates, drawing analogies to emergent properties, relationality, contingency, and the interaction of infinite potential with finite instantiation, illustrating the enduring relevance of Luria's insight into how the infinite may manifest without annihilating the finite, and how finite beings may exercise authentic autonomy while remaining dependent upon a sustaining ground, thus situating Tzimtzum at the intersection of metaphysics, theology, and philosophy. Finally, the practical, mystical, and ethical implications of Tzimtzum are profound, as it informs contemplative practice, ritual, and communal engagement, guiding the practitioner to recognize the subtle presence of the infinite, attune to surrounding and inner light, participate consciously in rectification, and elevate the dispersed sparks, thereby reinforcing that Tzimtzum functions not merely as a speculative metaphysical principle, but as a foundational structure for spiritual life, ethical responsibility, and cosmic harmony, confirming its central role in Lurianic thought, its enduring significance in scholarly, mystical, and practical contexts. Continuing the scholarly analysis of Tzimtzum, one must consider the profound implications this concept has for the relationship between divine transcendence and immanence. For the act of contraction establishes a framework in which God remains wholly present while simultaneously allowing finite existence to emerge, and this dual aspect is crucial to understanding both Lurianic metaphysics and the ethical responsibilities that flow from it, as the concealment of Ohr Ein Sof creates the necessary conditions for autonomy, multiplicity, and relationality within creation, permitting human beings and other finite entities to act with genuine freedom while remaining ontologically dependent on the sustaining infinite source. Scholars emphasize that Tzimtzum should not be understood as a spatial or temporal event in a literal sense, but rather as a qualitative modification of divine self-manifestation, a shift in the intensity and mode of revelation that produces a functional vacated space, Kalalim, which the finite can emerge without annihilation, and this conceptual subtlety distinguishes Lurianic Kabbalah from earlier mystical systems, offering a coherent solution to the problem of how finite multiplicity can coexist with infinite unity and providing a rigorous foundation for subsequent cosmological, metaphysical, and ethical structures. Following the contraction, the emanation of the Sephirot unfolds within the vacated space, structured so that each vessel receives an appropriate measure of divine light. The intensity proves too great for certain vessels, resulting in the shattering, Shevaret Hakalim, and this shattering is not merely a cosmic accident but a necessary ontological consequence of the interaction between infinite light and finite capacity, creating the conditions for tikkun, the rectification, in which human and cosmic agents participate in gathering, elevating, and harmonizing the dispersed sparks, Nitzatzit, a process that illustrates the inseparable link between metaphysical structure and ethical mystical responsibility. Additionally, the distinction between Ohr Penimi, inner light, and Ohr Makif, surrounding light, elucidates the continuous interplay of divine presence and concealment, as Ohr Penimi flows directly into the vessels, sustaining them and shaping their structure, while Ohr Makif surrounds them without direct penetration, preserving divine immanence while maintaining the necessary concealment that allows finite existence, a dual modality that is essential for understanding mystical perception, ethical discernment, and the graded intensities of revelation. Furthermore, Tzimtzum addresses long-standing philosophical and theological questions, including the existence of evil, limitation, and imperfection in the world. For the qualitative concealment of divine light accounts for the vulnerability, fragility, and incompleteness experienced by finite beings without implying any diminution of the infinite, thereby situating human agency, ethical responsibility, and spiritual practice as central components of the cosmological order, and demonstrating that limitation is not accidental but an integral condition for authentic freedom and relationality. Historical scholarship contextualizes Luria's formulation of Tzimtzum within 16th century Seift, highlighting his synthesis of prior Kabbalistic teachings, including the Zohar and Kordovirian thought, and noting that Tzimtzum provides a novel explanatory mechanism for the coexistence of infinite and finite, enabling independent forms to exist while preserving divine unity, a conceptual innovation that profoundly influenced subsequent mystical traditions, including Hasidism, and continues to inform contemporary scholarship in Jewish philosophy and the study of mysticism. The recursive and fractal character of Tzimtzum allows for nested layers of emanation, concealment, and revelation, producing a universe in which infinite potential is expressed through finite forms across multiple scales, and each finite form participates in a dynamic relational interplay with the surrounding light, enabling ethical discernment, spiritual perception, and practical engagement in tikkun, thus reinforcing the integral unity of metaphysics, ethics, and mysticism within the Lurianic system. Textual analysis further underscores the precision and depth of Luria's terminology, as concepts such as Kalal, or Makif, and Ohr Penimi are deployed with intentional rigor, reflecting a highly structured metaphysical model in which spatial and energetic metaphors serve to convey complex modes of divine concealment and finite perception dynamics, and where human comprehension of the infinite is necessarily mediated through structured layers of emanation and concealment. The ethical and mystical dimensions of Tzimtzum are inseparable from its metaphysical framework, as the very act of contraction establishes the conditions for free will, human agency, and spiritual labor, requiring the elevation of sparks, participation in rectification, and alignment of the finite with the infinite, integrating ontological insight, epistemological awareness, and ethical responsibility into a single cohesive system. Contemporary scholarly reflection also highlights Tzimtzum's resonance with modern Philosophical inquiries into emergence, relationality, contingency, and the interaction of infinite potential with finite instantiation, illustrating how Luria's insights anticipate discussions of how the infinite can manifest without annihilating the finite, and how finite agents can exercise authentic autonomy while remaining dependent upon a sustaining ground. Finally, the practical, mystical, and ethical implications of Tzimtzum are profound as it informs contemplative practice, ritual engagement, communal participation, and personal spiritual cultivation, guiding practitioners to attune to inner and surrounding light, elevate sparks of holiness, and participate consciously in the ongoing rectification of the cosmos, thereby confirming Tzimtzum's role as a foundational principle in Lurianic thought. Central to both scholarly analysis and lived mystical practice, and ensuring that the finite and infinite, concealment and revelation, autonomy and dependence, remain in continuous, harmonized relation throughout creation. The concept of Tzimtzum, central to Lurianic Kabbalah, serves as a foundational principle for understanding the interaction between the infinite divine and the finite world. By articulating a process of divine contraction, Luria provides a mechanism by which creation can exist as distinct and autonomous without compromising the unity and omnipresence of God. The contraction is not spatial or temporal in a literal sense, rather, it represents a qualitative modulation in the intensity of divine revelation. The infinite light, or Ein Sof, recedes conceptually to establish a vacated space, the Kallel, in which vessels can emerge and receive energy in measured proportions. This vacated space is essential for multiplicity, relationality, and ethical agency, as it allows finite beings to perceive the divine, act independently, and participate in the cosmic process of tikkun, the rectification. Following Tzimtzum, the emanation of the Sephirot occurs within the vacated space. The Sephirot, conceived as vessels, function to receive, channel, and distribute divine light. However, not all vessels can sustain the intensity of Ohr Ein Sof, resulting in the shattering of vessels, or Shevert Hakalim. The dispersion of divine sparks, Nitzatzit, establishes the ontological condition for rectification. Human participation becomes a crucial component of this process, as ethical and spiritual labor, through prayer, mitzvot, and contemplative practice, restores these sparks to their proper place, realigning the finite world with divine intent. In this sense, Tzimtzum is inseparable from moral and mystical responsibility, demonstrating the direct linkage between metaphysical principles and human agency. A further dimension of Tzimtzum lies in the distinction between Orpenami, inner light, and Makif, surrounding light. Orpenami flows directly into vessels, sustaining and structuring them, whereas Makif envelopes without direct penetration. This distinction preserves divine immanence while maintaining the necessary concealment that allows finite existence to emerge without being overwhelmed. Scholars emphasize that this dual modality facilitates mystical perception, ethical discernment, and the gradation of divine revelation. By employing such a nuanced model, Luria successfully reconciles the infinite and finite, preserving divine unity while enabling multiplicity, contingency, and relationality. The philosophical significance of Tzimtzum extends to questions concerning evil, limitation, and imperfection. The qualitative withdrawal of divine light explains the presence of deficiency, fragility, and suffering in the world without implying a diminution in the divine. Limitation becomes a necessary condition for authentic freedom and relationality, situating human agency and ethical responsibility at the center of cosmic order. In this schema, ethical action is not peripheral, but structurally embedded, with the elevation of scattered sparks forming both a spiritual and metaphysical imperative. Thus, Tzimtzum provides a coherent framework for understanding the emergence of multiplicity and contingency while preserving the transcendence and unity of God. Historically, Tzimtzum represents Luria's innovative response to the limitations of earlier Kabbalistic models, including those in the Zohar and Kordovirian system. Earlier models struggled to explain how finite multiplicity could coexist with infinite unity without dissolving into undifferentiated oneness. Luria's notion of contraction offers a mechanism by which independent forms can exist while remaining ontologically dependent upon the infinite. This innovation influenced not only subsequent Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, but also modern scholarly interpretations of mystical systems, highlighting the enduring significance of Tzimtzum as both a metaphysical and ethical principle. The recursive and fractal character of Tzimtzum further enhances its explanatory power. Each contraction allows for nested layers of emanation, concealment, and revelation, generating a cosmos in which infinite potential is expressed through finite forms across multiple scales. These nested layers ensure that every finite entity participates dynamically with the surrounding light, facilitating ethical discernment, spiritual perception, and practical engagement in tikkun. Textual analysis underscores the precision of Luria's terminology, kalal, or makif, or penami, each reflecting a meticulously structured metaphysical model in which human comprehension of the infinite is necessarily mediated by layered systems of emanation and concealment. The ethical and mystical dimensions of Tzimtzum are inseparable from its metaphysical formulation. By creating a qualitative concealment, Tzimtzum establishes the preconditions for human free will, ethical decision-making, and spiritual labor. Practitioners are thus tasked with elevating sparks, restoring vessels, and aligning finite existence with the infinite, integrating ontological insight, epistemological awareness, and ethical responsibility into a cohesive whole. Contemporary scholarship has also drawn analogies between Tzimtzum and modern philosophical inquiries into emergence, relationality, and contingency, illustrating the relevance of Luria's insights to broader metaphysical and theological discourse. Finally, Tzimtzum's implications for mystical practice, communal life, and personal spiritual development are profound. By attuning to inner and surrounding light, recognizing the presence of the divine in concealed forms, and participating consciously in the rectification of the world, human beings enact the metaphysical principles described in Lurianic texts. Tzimtzum thus serves as a foundational structure, linking divine transcendence, ethical responsibility, and mystical experience in a coherent framework that undergirds both scholarly analysis and spiritual practice. A crucial aspect of Tzimtzum lies in its ontological implications for understanding the structure of creation. By establishing a vacated space in which finite vessels may exist, Luria creates a framework for both contingency and relationality. The infinite does not diminish in potency, rather, the concealment of divine light allows for the emergence of independent forms that can act, perceive, and relate. This conceptualization ensures that the finite world is neither illusory nor subsumed, allowing beings to exercise authentic agency within a coherent metaphysical system. Scholars have emphasized that Tzimtzum thereby resolves long-standing tensions within Kabbalistic thought regarding the coexistence of infinite unity and finite multiplicity, providing a rigorous model for how creation can unfold without compromising divine transcendence. The interplay between divine contraction and emanation also establishes the conditions for the Sephirotic hierarchy to function effectively. Each Sephirah receives light according to its capacity, with the vacated space ensuring that differentiation and gradation are possible. However, when the intensity of the divine flow exceeds the capacity of certain vessels, Shevarit Hakalim occurs, scattering sparks throughout creation. The shattering, rather than being a flaw or accident, is a necessary ontological event that facilitates the subsequent process of tikkun. The human role in this rectification is central. By gathering and elevating the sparks, individuals participate in the restoration of cosmic harmony. In this sense, Tzimtzum establishes a metaphysical basis for ethical and spiritual responsibility, embedding moral agency within the very structure of creation. Furthermore, the distinction between Ohr Penami and Ohr Makif provides a nuanced account of divine immanence. Ohr Penami, the inner light, sustains and informs the vessels directly, whereas Ohr Makif, the surrounding light, envelopes without penetrating fully. This duality allows finite beings to exist within the presence of the infinite while maintaining distinctiveness and autonomy. Scholars note that this mechanism elegantly reconciles divine omnipresence with the necessity of concealment, enabling finite entities to perceive, interact with, and respond to the divine without being overwhelmed. It also underpins the hierarchical and relational structure of the Sephirot, as each vessel is situated in a dynamic field of reception and limitation. Tzimtzum also addresses fundamental philosophical and theological questions, particularly the problem of evil and the existence of limitation. The concealment of divine light explains why imperfection, suffering, and fragility exist in the world without implying any deficiency in God. Limitation becomes a prerequisite for authentic freedom, relationality, and ethical action. Within this framework, human beings are not passive recipients, but active participants in the ongoing process of rectification, responsible for the elevation of sparks and the harmonization of finite existence with the infinite. In this way, Tzimtzum integrates metaphysics and ethics, demonstrating that the structural conditions of creation are inseparable from human responsibility and spiritual labor. Historical scholarship situates Tzimtzum within the broader context of 16th century Sefer, emphasizing Luria's innovative contribution to Kabbalistic thought. While earlier Kabbalistic systems, such as those found in the Zohar or Kordovarian writings, emphasized emanation and divine flow, they struggled to account for the emergence of contingent multiplicity without diminishing divine unity. Luria's concept of contraction addresses this challenge by providing a structured mechanism for the coexistence of infinite and finite, offering a sophisticated metaphysical framework that integrates cosmology, anthropology, and ethics. The influence of this innovation extends beyond Lurianic Kabbalah itself, shaping later mystical traditions, Hasidic thought, and modern scholarly interpretations of Jewish mysticism. The recursive nature of Tzimtzum further elucidates its metaphysical depth. Each contraction allows for nested layers of emanation, concealment, and revelation, producing a cosmos in which infinite potential manifests through finite forms across multiple scales. These nested structures ensure that every entity participates in a dynamic relational process with the surrounding light, reinforcing the inseparability of metaphysical principles and ethical practice. Textual analysis confirms that Luria's terminology, kallel, or makif, or penami, is highly precise, reflecting a meticulously structured metaphysical system in which spatial and energetic metaphors serve explanatory functions, allowing finite beings to comprehend, in a limited way, the dynamics of divine presence and concealment. Finally, the practical implications of Tzimtzum are both mystical and ethical. The concealment of divine light invites practitioners to cultivate awareness, ethical sensitivity, and active participation in rectification. By attuning to inner and surrounding light and elevating scattered sparks, individuals engage directly with the cosmic processes described by Luria. In this way, Tzimtzum functions not merely as a metaphysical principle, but as a foundational guide for spiritual practice, ethical action, and communal responsibility, linking divine transcendence, human agency, and mystical experience in a coherent framework that continues to inform both scholarship and religious life. Tzimtzum as a principle also has profound implications for the understanding of divine creativity and the ontology of being. By creating a conceptual space for finite entities to emerge, Luria articulates a model in which the infinite can manifest without compromising its unity or omnipresence. This contraction is not a diminishment, but a strategic concealment that allows for the development of distinct forms capable of experiencing, interacting with, and contributing to the ongoing process of rectification. Scholars emphasize that this framework reconciles the coexistence of infinite and finite realities, providing a coherent metaphysical explanation for the emergence of multiplicity, contingency, and ethical responsibility within the cosmos. Without Tzimtzum, finite existence would lack autonomy, and the conditions for human agency, moral deliberation, and spiritual participation would be untenable. The process of emanation following Tzimtzum further elaborates the structure of creation. The 10 Sephirot, understood as vessels for divine light, receive the influx of Ohr Ein Sof within the vacated space. The intensity of the light often exceeds the capacity of certain vessels, resulting in Sheveret Hakalim, the shattering of vessels, which disperses sparks throughout the world. This event is a metaphysical necessity that establishes the framework for tikkun, the rectification, through which finite beings participate in the restoration and harmonization of divine energy. The human role in tikkun is central, as ethical action, spiritual discipline, and intentional engagement serve to elevate these sparks, bridging the gap between the finite and infinite, and demonstrating the inseparability of metaphysics and praxis. Lurianic thought. The distinction between Ohr Penami, inner light, and Ohr Makif, surrounding light, offers further insight into the mechanisms of divine concealment and immanence. Ohr Penami flows directly into vessels, shaping and sustaining them, while Ohr Makif envelopes without fully penetrating, allowing finite beings to sense the divine without being overwhelmed. This distinction ensures that multiplicity and autonomy are preserved while maintaining the pervasive presence of God. Scholars note that this mechanism also establishes a gradient of revelation, facilitating mystical perception and ethical discernment, and highlighting the structural sophistication of Lurianic cosmology in mediating the infinite and finite. Tzimtzum's explanatory power extends to philosophical and theological considerations, particularly concerning the existence of evil, suffering, and limitation. By positing a qualitative concealment of divine light, Luria accounts for the imperfections and fragilities of finite existence without attributing deficiency to the infinite. Limitation becomes a prerequisite for freedom, ethical agency, and relationality, situating human beings as co-participants in the process of rectification. In this context, Tzimtzum integrates metaphysical, ethical, and mystical dimensions, presenting a universe in which the conditions of creation necessitate moral and spiritual engagement and where finite beings contribute actively to the ongoing restoration of harmony. Historically, Luria's conceptualization of Tzimtzum represents a significant evolution within Kabbalistic thought. While earlier systems emphasized emanation and the flow of divine energy, they struggled to account for the emergence of independent multiplicity. Tzimtzum provides a rigorous framework in which finite forms can exist while remaining fully dependent on the infinite, resolving a central tension in mystical cosmology. This innovation influenced later mystical movements, including Hasidism, and continues to inform contemporary scholarship on Jewish mysticism, philosophy, and theology, demonstrating the enduring relevance of Lurianic insights into the dynamics of creation, presence, and concealment. The recursive and fractal nature of Tzimtzum also reinforces its philosophical and mystical significance. Each contraction enables successive layers of emanation and concealment, producing a cosmos in which infinite potential manifests across multiple scales of reality. This nested structure ensures that every finite entity participates in a relational dynamic with the surrounding light, reinforcing ethical responsibility, spiritual perception, and the practical engagement of human beings in the work of tikkun. Textual precision in terms such as kalal or makif and erpenomy reflects a deliberate and structured metaphysical model, in which spatial and energetic metaphors clarify the dynamics of divine concealment and finite reception. Finally, Tzimtzum's practical implications extend beyond metaphysical understanding into mystical practice, communal life, and personal spiritual cultivation. By attuning to inner and surrounding light, recognizing the presence of the divine in concealed forms, and participating consciously in the rectification of the world, human beings enact the principles articulated by Luria. Tzimtzum thus functions not merely as an abstract metaphysical principle, but as a foundational framework for spiritual practice, ethical responsibility, and cosmic engagement, integrating divine transcendence, human agency, and mystical perception in a coherent system that continues to shape both scholarship and lived religious experience. The culmination of Tzimtzum's significance lies in its comprehensive integration of metaphysics, ethics, and mystical praxis, forming a cohesive framework in which the infinite interacts dynamically with the finite world. By positing a deliberate contraction of divine light, Luria establishes a conceptual and ontological space in which finite existence can emerge without compromising the unity, omnipresence, or creative potency of God. This vacated space, or kalal, enables the differentiation of the sephirot, allowing each vessel to function according to its capacity and maintain relational and ethical integrity. The necessity of this contraction highlights the delicate balance within Lurianic cosmology. The infinite remains fully present, yet the concealment of its intensity allows for autonomy, multiplicity, and genuine human participation in cosmic processes. The interplay of Tzimtzum with the shattering of vessels, Sheveret Hakalim, underscores the structural logic of creation. The overwhelming intensity of divine light on finite vessels results in a dispersal of sparks, which are scattered throughout the vacated space. This dispersion is not accidental but constitutes a purposeful metaphysical condition that generates the framework for tikkun, the rectification. Humans, through ethical action, contemplative practice, and spiritual awareness, engage in the process of elevating these sparks, restoring harmony, and aligning finite reality with the infinite. This ongoing participation situates human agency as a critical component of cosmic structure, emphasizing that moral and spiritual responsibility is inseparable from the metaphysical principles underlying creation. The dual modalities of divine light, or penami and or makif, further illuminate the dynamics of Tzimtzum. Or penami, the inner light, directly sustains and structures vessels, whereas or makif, the surrounding light, envelopes without penetrating, maintaining divine immanence while allowing finite forms to develop autonomy. This duality preserves multiplicity and relationality while safeguarding divine transcendence, offering a sophisticated resolution to the philosophical problem of how finite existence can persist in the presence of the infinite. The graded intensities of revelation facilitated by these two modes of light provide a metaphysical and experiential structure for mystical perception, ethical discernment, and spiritual cultivation. Tzimtzum also offers a profound explanation for the existence of limitation, imperfection, and suffering within creation. The concealment of divine light accounts for the fragility and deficiency of finite beings without implying any diminution of God. Limitation, in this context, becomes a necessary condition for freedom, ethical engagement, and relationality. Human beings are empowered to participate in Tikkun precisely because the finite world is neither fully illuminated nor completely autonomous, but exists within a relational tension between concealment and presence. This understanding integrates ethical responsibility directly into the cosmological structure, establishing a universe in which moral action is metaphysically significant and spiritually consequential. Historically, Luria's articulation of Tzimtzum represents a turning point in Kabbalistic thought. While previous systems had emphasized divine emanation and the flow of light, they lacked a coherent mechanism for reconciling infinite unity with finite multiplicity. Tzimtzum provides this mechanism, establishing the structural conditions necessary for creation to manifest as distinct, yet dependent entities. This innovation influenced subsequent mystical traditions, including Hasidism, and continues to inform modern scholarly analysis of Jewish mysticism, philosophy, and theology. By introducing a structured framework for the coexistence of finite and infinite realities, Luria transformed the understanding of divine creativity, human agency, and ethical responsibility within mystical thought. The recursive, fractal nature of Tzimtzum enhances its explanatory and practical significance. Each contraction generates nested layers of emanation, concealment, and revelation, allowing infinite potential to be expressed through finite forms at multiple levels. This nested architecture ensures that every finite entity participates in relational dynamics with the surrounding light, facilitating ethical engagement, spiritual awareness, and practical rectification. Textual precision in the terminology of Lurianic Kabbalah, Kalal, or Makif, or Penami, reflects a carefully structured metaphysical system in which spatial and energetic metaphors function as explanatory devices, enabling finite beings to apprehend the infinite dynamics of creation. Practically, Tzimtzum informs mystical practice, communal engagement, and personal spiritual cultivation. By attuning to inner and surrounding light, recognizing the concealed presence of the divine, and participating consciously in the elevation of sparks, human beings enact the principles of rectification and align themselves with cosmic processes. Tzimtzum thus bridges the gap between metaphysical understanding and lived spiritual experience, demonstrating that ethical and mystical activity is both a response to and a continuation of divine creative action. It provides a coherent structure linking divine transcendence, human agency, and mystical perception, illustrating the inseparability of ontological insight, ethical responsibility, and spiritual practice. In conclusion, Tzimtzum represents the centerpiece of Lurianic Kabbalah, offering a profound and rigorous framework for understanding the emergence of finite multiplicity within the infinite, the structural dynamics of the Sephirotic system, and the ethical and mystical responsibilities of human beings. By positing a deliberate contraction of divine light, Luria reconciles the presence of limitation, imperfection, and contingency with the unity and omnipotence of God. The resulting conceptual architecture integrates metaphysics, cosmology, ethics, and mystical praxis, establishing a coherent model in which the infinite remains fully present, finite beings exercise genuine autonomy, and humans participate actively in the ongoing rectification of creation. Tzimtzum thus functions as a comprehensive principle that informs both theoretical scholarship and spiritual practice, demonstrating its enduring relevance, sophistication, and centrality in the study of Kabbalistic thought.